when you propose to people a plant-free diet, they usually are very concerned about fibers and gut health. So, are fibers actually essential for having a healthy microbiome or even for bowel movements?
Yeah, no, not at all. And the thing is that we haven't traditionally eaten a whole bunch of fiber. We've been told that fiber is really good for us, and that came from the work of Dr. Burkitt, who came up with Burkitt's lymphoma, and he wrote a book in 1979, I think, called "Don't Forget About Fiber." And he worked in Africa, and he saw that these people had low rates of colon cancer, and he said, "Oh, they eat more fiber, and they have less colon cancer. Must be the fiber." I mean, it was based on zero actual scientific inquiry. It was just a blind guess based on his own opinions of things. And that actually hasn't been borne out by the evidence. Increased fiber doesn't actually lower your risk of colon cancer. It can actually cause inflammatory issues. It can cause micro-abrasions in your gut lining and can cause increased inflammatory reaction, increased mucus secretion, things like that. It can actually cause, it's actually an anti-nutrient. Fiber itself is an anti-nutrient. It will form a physical lattice and block out the digestion and breakdown of food that you're eating and block out and stick to the walls of your gut, and so food can't actually get in and get absorbed even after it is digested, if it is digested. So studies have shown that it can reduce absorption by up to 30%, and it also binds to bile, which we have to break down and emulsify fat and absorb the fat. You can't really absorb fat without bile. For most fats, about less than 10% you can absorb without bile. So if you're eating fiber, it binds to the bile, and now you can't absorb as much fat. And your body's working really hard to absorb fat. You have 5 organs working in concert to absorb fat. Stomach starts breaking down the food. Your liver makes bile. Your gallbladder stores and concentrates bile. So if you don't eat fat every day, you can still get the same amount of fat absorption even after several days. Your pancreas makes lipase and other enzymes that break down that fat and releases it. And then your small intestine absorbs the fat and bile complex. And so if your body didn't want fat, if fat was so horrible for you and was going to kill you, why do we have 5 organs working together to absorb fat? That doesn't make sense. It wouldn't nature wouldn't work that hard to get fat to absorb fat if fat weren't good for us. And you have a limited capacity. You have a limited ability to absorb fat based on that bile. You run out of bile, you can't absorb fat. So if you're eating a lot of fiber, now you can't absorb as much fat. You will run out of that bile more and you'll eliminate it out. Additionally, we make taurine in our liver. That's considered a non-essential amino acid, but it's very important. It just means we don't need to get it from our diet. Well, some people do. Some people have a higher demand, and studies have shown that higher taurine intake dietarily actually improves health. Taurine only comes from meat, and uncooked meat or less cooked meat is preferable. But we make it in our liver. That gets expressed in our bile, and we absorb that when we eat fat. So if we're eating more fiber, then that's actually going to bind to the bile and strip it out, and you're going to lose the taurine at the same time. So even just eating fiber, you can actually become taurine deficient. Even before we talk about the 30% reduction in absorption otherwise. I mean, this is some of the benefits they say that fiber has, because it says, well, diabetics, when they're eating more fiber for the same carbohydrate and other things, just adding in fiber, that actually reduces their blood sugar. How does it do that? Well, it blocks 30% of the absorption of carbohydrates. So, fun fact, you can just reduce your carbohydrate consumption by 30% and get the exact same result, or just eliminate carbohydrates completely and just not have diabetes at all. But that's how that works. And if you're not eating things that are harmful, like sugar and carbs and plant toxins and things like that, then you don't actually want to block out the absorption of the food that you're eating. You want to absorb all of it. And so that's going to be detrimental. Now, no one ever proved that we needed fiber. There are many tribes and peoples since time immemorial that have never eaten fiber. The Inuit, for example, they live in the Arctic Circle. There's no fiber. They're living on ice floes and things like that. They're just eating meat. And so, while they were eating the stomachs, that's just you saying that. That's not actually what they did. And a lot of times they ate seals and whales and fish, which are carnivores. And so if you're eating their stomach contents, you're eating other fish and seals and things like that. Polar bears, they'd eat those too. So they're not getting fiber, they're not having problems. And you look at the gut microbiome of the Inuit when they're eating their traditional diet, and there's a lot of things that influence the microbiome, but when they're eating their traditional diet, they actually found they have very diverse and healthy microbiomes, right? So we don't know enough about the microbiome to really make definitive statements, and we certainly don't know enough about how to manipulate the microbiome to make definitive statements. In fact, a lot of these companies say, okay, well, here's your microbiome. Yeah, it's okay, it's not great, but what you need to do is you need to eat more fiber and eat less red meat. And what people are doing is they're doing the exact opposite. They're cutting out all fiber in all plants and only eating red meat. And then 3 months later, their microbiome actually improves. And say, oh, great, good job. You listened to us. No, we didn't. We actually did the exact opposite and actually improved our microbiome. Now, there are reasons for that. If this is our evolved biologically appropriate diet, that diet should support our optimal microbiome, right? Because the microbiomes in all animals are supported by the food that they're eating. So they eat their optimal food that supports their optimal microbiome. The same goes for us. It also supports our optimal oral biome, which is part of your whole biome system. And so when you change what you're eating, especially when you get rid of carbohydrates, that massively changes the bacteria in your mouth to a much healthier form of bacteria. So, very quick, simple proof on how humans are not designed to eat carbohydrates is that it changes our oral biome to breed for bacteria that rot our teeth, that cause cavities. It's the carb eating bacteria that cause cavities. No animal on earth eats a natural diet in the wild that rots their teeth. Because if you rot your teeth and you lose your teeth, you lose the ability to eat and you die. And so no animal will have an evolved natural diet that makes them rot out their teeth and die. And so if we're eating, or any animal is eating, a diet that rots their teeth, and it goes for your pets too, that if they're eating something that's rotting their teeth, that by definition is not their optimal diet and is causing harm. Oral health is a window into overall health and especially cardiovascular health. And we get some of these oral biomes that are perpetuated by carbohydrates and sugar that actually show up in arterial plaques, that show up in glioblastoma brain tumors, that show up in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and things like that in biopsies of the brain. So these could be actually causing direct harm to the body. Eating carbohydrates, eating fibers precipitates and breeds for those sorts of things. So no animal on this earth will eat something that rots their teeth naturally. So that's proof that that's not our natural diet, and that changes our oral biome. So when we go back to just eating meat, it goes back, and now we have a healthier oral biome. We don't get cavities. Everything you eat, you're chewing up in your mouth, and that bacteria is getting into the food, and you swallow that, and that food bolus can act like a Trojan horse, and some of those bacteria stuffed in the inside, some of those will get through. Some of them won't. If you just eat yogurt or probiotics, studies have shown they actually just die in your stomach acid. But eating it in a bolus of food, I mean, unless you're disinfecting your mouth with Listerine and things like that, which isn't a great idea, I don't think, because you actually want those. You want the healthy bacteria. It's just all these people. There's dentists now painting kids' teeth with iodine, like disinfecting it, like they're going into surgery or something like that. Do whales do that? Do koalas do that? Do lions have to do that? No animal has to do that. So if we're doing that, we're doing something wrong. And so those bacteria from your mouth are actually getting through down to your microbiome. And so I think that's where those bacteria are coming from. So you have a mouthful of probiotics all the time. You don't need to buy them. You don't need to waste your money on those sorts of things. As long as you're eating the right thing, you'll have the right oral biome, and that will seed your microbiome. And so you don't need fiber for that. You definitely don't need fiber for that. And in fact, in a lot of cases, you don't want fiber because it causes all those other problems as well. It also causes methane buildup because the bacteria start working on the fiber and secrete methane, which causes bloating and gas and discomfort. It also slows down the peristalsis. So it actually slows down your gut motility. And studies have actually shown, randomized controlled trials have actually shown that more fiber equals slower transit period. So it actually slows down, causes constipation, and causes increased symptoms with constipation and symptomatic, bloating, fissures, all these other sorts of things. And that reducing fiber improves these things, and eliminating fiber actually eliminated all problems in that study. for those people that did that. So fiber can actually be harmful. Another argument that people say is that, well, the fiber starts getting broken down into short chain fatty acids, not much, but a little bit, and that gets turned into butyrate, which is a ketone product, and that feeds your intestinal cells. But when you're in ketosis, the main ketone body that you make is beta hydroxybutyrate. So it's the same thing. Your cells use that, and that's true because the thing is your body actually prefers ketones. And when you have ketones available and glucose available, most of your body will only run on those ketones, right? It's only when you don't have enough ketones you start filling the gap with glucose. And so your intestinal cells can still run on glucose because people that don't eat fiber and aren't in ketosis eating junk food, their gut cells aren't dying. They aren't having massive intestinal failures or anything like that without fiber. And but they do prefer those ketone bodies. If you're in ketosis, you're going to get more of those through your bloodstream. But if you're also eating protein, you still get those short chain fatty acids because your microbiome is now geared up to eat proteins and things like that. And so various amino acids can actually be broken down into short chain fatty acids and turned into butyrate as well. So you don't need the fiber from that standpoint either.
Awesome. Well, that was a very comprehensive answer. And
Mhm.
I actually am a living proof of this because I
Mm.
suffered from extreme bloating. I'm talking every single day, 24/7. I looked pregnant and I was eating a diet very, very high in fibers, like any type of raw vegetables, cooked vegetables, but also a lot of grains,
Mm.
like high fiber grains. And I was trying to solve this problem. I had bloating and I had constipation for almost
Mm.
2 years. And so I was feeling terrible. I went to the doctor and they gave me all kinds of fiber supplements. You know, those fibers
Yeah.
that are soluble in water and then they become like a gelatin. That
Mhm.
those type of supplements made it worse, like 10 times worse. And the only way I solved this problem was when I transitioned to a plant-free diet. So I wasn't eating any
Mm.
more vegetables, fruit, and grains. And in a matter of 1 or 2 weeks, I was never bloated again and I solved my constipation problems.
Oh, very good. I'm glad to hear that.
So,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
amazing.
so that was insane.
Yeah, you see a lot of people doing that too, and especially gut issues. I mean, because everything you eat goes through your gut, and so of course, what you eat is going to impact your gut health. And so, just making those very simple changes and then seeing those big results. I mean, that should tell you a lot about what we're eating. And if you're eating something that's causing those gut issues, causing teeth issues, you should really think long and hard about what you're eating because that does not happen to other animals eating their natural diet. So that should tell you a lot, actually.